In recent years, retail has gotten a bad rap, especially fashion retail. Too often, stores have fallen into a slump, neglected by management's shift in attention to building up their e-commerce channels, and just as often because many brands have too many stores and too little revenue to maintain them all properly. That's led to a rash of retail closures in many key markets around the world. But is retail really fated to become just a memory of the way we used to shop? Or can the right people with a vision and the drive to bring it to fruition rejuvenate retail into a dynamic place where today's consumer wants to shop? I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. Today I'm speaking with Ron Thurston, retail expert, author, and a champion of physical retail. Ron is Vice President of Stores for Intermix and has a decades-long career of working with leading brands and driving retail excellence, from visual merchandising to taking teams of diverse retail staff and helping them become the best they can be. His enthusiasm for retail is contagious, and he takes an industry that many people view as an if all else fails job and shows us the exciting career opportunities it offers for people of all different skill sets and education levels. Retail is one industry that has almost no barriers to entry and few limits on how high you can rise. Most importantly, Ron talks about his vision for revitalizing retail and provides a path that both large and small companies can easily follow. You can find Ron's book, Retail Pride, on Amazon in paperback, hardcover, or Kindle versions. Before we get started, if you're overwhelmed by information and wish someone could sift and sort through it all and provide you with a tight summary of just what you need to know, then you might want to check out Inside Fashion's Market Snapshots. You can find more information at insidefashionlive.net/snapshots. You can also find the link in the show notes for this podcast episode. Now let's sit down with Ron and talk about retail. Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today and to share your views with our audience about what you see happening at retail.
My pleasure.
As you know, the talk has been about stores becoming irrelevant, even before COVID, and the demise of major retailers has seemed to prove that point. In your book, Retail Pride, you paint a very optimistic picture of bricks and mortar retail, not just as a distribution channel, but as a career path. Can you share some of that vision?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you for asking, because the entire intent of the book, exactly to your point, really, I started to really hear so much about the demise of retail when this kind of term retail apocalypse started to get popular several years ago. And I found that, when I first started to hear it, I thought, like, that does not apply to the hundreds of thousands of people and the million that I've personally interacted with and the millions that work in this industry. They love working in this industry. And the idea of kind of an apocalypse of changing their career path, or the impact that retail has on the world, and how we live and operate our lives, it felt like very strange. And so I started to write a blog. I started to get ideas about what were people interested in, what did they respond to, why were they so proud to work in retail, and collected a lot of really great information and quotes, which are in the book.
Right.
And the bottom line is that this is an industry that is often self-taught. It's often one that you kind of grow up in, often by accident, which is why the subtitle of the book is The Guide to Celebrating Your Accidental Career, because for many people, it is absolutely an accident. But then they start working in it and they fall in love with this idea of managing and leading a multi-million-dollar business, to being so talented in so many different things, from visual merchandising to store ops to service to leadership, to product and design. Like, the aspects that go into running a brick and mortar retail store, and the skills that you need are extensive. And so this pride that I've felt my entire 3-decade career in stores is very translated across the entire industry. And I wanted to write something that was really the first of its kind that spoke directly to the millions of people that work in brick and mortar retail. And that applies to all price points. This book is not a book for one particular category because it could be grocery, it could be pharmacy, it could be beauty, apparel. We all actually do a very similar job. We just sell different product. And there's a lot to celebrate in our industry.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I'm really glad you've pointed that out, because I think that all this talk about a retail apocalypse, which, I mean, we could sit here, and I think you pointed it out very clearly in your book, that most of the number of stores, for example, in the U.S. is vast, and so even if a lot of stores close, that really doesn't mean there's an apocalypse. The numbers were very skewed.
They're skewed, and we all understand the closures of this year and or 2020 and what has happened, and we're all acutely aware of that, and the people that are currently looking for new opportunities. But what I would say is that doesn't diminish their pride in the industry. It just means that there are fewer opportunities, maybe fewer today than there were 5 years ago, but they still love what they do. And they still want to be celebrated for it. And if you're 10 years, 15 years into your career in retail, whether that's store ops, sales, leadership, multi-store leadership, this is an industry that you love and you are ready to do it again. It just may be for somebody else.
Right. When you look at retail, it's sort of been a slow decline within the apparel sector. And I think, you brought a very important point up in your book. You put a lot of emphasis on the importance of service and customer relationships. And this was traditionally the way great retail was built. In fact, it's funny, but just this past weekend, I watched a documentary about the demise of the great San Francisco department stores. And the narrator had pointed out how the owners and senior management had their offices in the store itself, and they were constantly interacting with customers. It wasn't just the sellers that were on the selling floor. And they knew the customer. They understood the customer. They were as much merchants as they were management. But for decades, that merchant role seems to have been pushed out of the executive suite and sometimes out of the organization altogether. Do you see this coming back in some iteration or another?
I think there's nothing more powerful as we think about rebuilding this industry and the power of brick and mortar than every level of leadership within an organization understanding the customer and being customer facing and being right in the heart of where the business happens. And if that means that your office is in the store and you spend some time just listening and learning and asking questions and being curious, then absolutely yes. That is because you can't learn what's in the customer's heart and mind through what they're buying on your website. You don't actually, all you see is the transaction, and you may have CRM data, and you may have some survey data. There's a lot that you can learn from a technology CRM standpoint, but you'll never learn as much as you do when you're in the store, on the sales floor, asking questions of your team, asking questions of your customers, and learning and growing that way. So if that were the future, I would say that's a very bright future forward.
Yeah, I think that's really important. People have become very reliant upon data. But as you point out, the data only shows you what people bought. It doesn't tell you why they didn't buy what they didn't buy.
Agreed. And because look at how small typical percentage of conversion is on websites, 1%, right. 2%. So what did the other 99% of people that didn't make a purchase, why didn't they purchase? Similar in stores, if your conversion rates are at 15, 20%, what did the 80% not buy? Or why didn't they make a purchase? And you can learn a lot by just asking questions. And I would just push that back to the store teams. They know why the customers didn't purchase. The full-time salespeople, and I think more in the apparel space especially, have all the answers to your business. They know exactly what's happening. They know what the customer says. They know what they're looking for, why something didn't fit, why they didn't like that season. There's so much we can learn, and it's right at our own fingertips.
And yet people have just been turning a blind eye to that, so to speak, and would rather rely simply on a big data point of view.
Agreed.
That particular documentary, it was really interesting to see how things were built and how they, time and time again, it wasn't just one department store. That model was replicated across the country.
And it's unfortunate because the beauty of that business and the community that they built was so much about kind of curation and product and service and all the things that we love about brick and mortar retail, but done in a department store way back then. And so that you could spend the afternoon, you could have lunch and have your favorite sales teams and find all of your great product. And the further we backed away from what that true connection to your customer looked like, so much of that business went to specialty, which is fine, but there's room for both when they're done well.
Right. Yeah, and that brings me to the next point. In your book, you talk about the importance of visual merchandising, and I completely agree with you. In fact, I literally was just talking about that in our Inside Fashion 2021 Retail Outlook. Yet even the higher-end retailers in recent years seem to have cut way back on visual merchandising. What happened that swept away that retail that was sort of a fantasy world rather than just a place to buy stuff?
I think so much of it has also come down to cost. Those big, beautiful, I live here in New York City, Bergdorf windows that we all dream about every season. When you translate that into smaller versions of that, it gets quite expensive. So you may make the investment up front, but I think you can really reinterpret really great vision for not a lot of money, but the in-store piece of it and the visual merchandising piece of it is such an art and a skill that is taught and continues to elevate your brand. And so finding people who do that really well, it was part of my love growing up, having done it for Gap brand, is that you're creating a fantasy, but that fantasy is only translatable if you have a team of people across your fleet organization who love it as much as you do. And so what I used to do was we would set kind of the mock store of what the vision was for the season with buying team and what are our big investments for the season, what's our marketing campaign. But then I traveled the country and I taught visual merchandising and said, well, this was the vision. This is what we're going to do. Your store has a very unique shape. So let's talk about how do we interpret it into the size of your store or what's unique about your customer. Why can we make this the best possible version of the season? But I think over the years, some of that kind of field training, visual merchandising leadership has continued to diminish. And so it's left up to a fleet of brick and mortar stores to interpret a directive without having individual training. And so the entire execution is only done as well as the skill of that existing team. And so I would push back and say invest more in that because we're all sitting on less inventory today. We're all trying to create really memorable moments, but let's do that through more training and actually more support and more engagement with store teams that creates a stronger visual merchandising skill. Like it all works hand in hand. That investment in the field works toward like the brand's vision for the product and the store design that you spent millions of dollars doing and the service that then is provided. All of it falls apart somewhere along the line if there's not an investment in the people. And that's where visual merchandising, I think, has struggled a bit.
So you think it's more because they haven't really engaged the people as well as simply decorating the selling floor? I
do. Engaged and trained. When you think of some kind of many young people coming out of school today from great schools like Parsons or FIT or FITM, they have a dream to work in visual merchandising. And so they're looking for companies who can provide those career opportunities and not just kind of executing, but dreaming and having a vision. There's lots and lots of people who want to do this and they can do it well. And so I would say go back and engage, go back and train, go back and invest, and you'd be really pleasantly surprised to see what could happen.
Yeah, I think that it's probably a shift in mindset, which is hard to make after years and years of selling on price. So everything was cut out in order to support lower prices. So now you would have to have that long-term sort of a vision to be willing to invest in elevating.
Agreed. If you go back to your point around like the great department store in San Francisco, they were very invested in those teams. And so they likely had some kind of leadership training programs. They had investment in visual merchandising. They had great kind of connections to their customer. They had designer in-store appearances, probably. There's all kinds of kind of immersing yourself in this world of service and selling and brand and experience. And that is what we all kind of dream of getting back to today.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think that in a sense, because everything for decades has gone to selling volume at a price, even for mid-tier and better brands, that we've forgotten about that you need to create that excitement, because after all, most fashion purchases are impulse buys. I forget the exact percent, but the industry certainly could not survive on people buying it on simply on a replacement basis.
Exactly. And particularly in the fashion space, when you think about this kind of customer, and I work in women's multi-brand ready-to-wear apparel today, her dream of just, I need something to make me feel great. I'm going somewhere. I want to look great. I want to go to this luncheon with my friends. I'm kind of talking pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID soon. I want to do all of these things, and I want to look great, feel beautiful. That's our job, to make her feel beautiful and to teach her how to wear things in her closet in a new way, to inspire her to try a new trend, dress in a new color. All of that comes from an in-store experience and what happens in the fitting room. And to like that idea of we can always do more, we can be engaged, we can rebuild our business through service, for me is very real and something I live every day.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and we can see that being played out in cosmetics, which of course for the moment is on hold because of COVID, but prior to that, even after apparel had really become struggling, so to speak, to have that fantasy element, the cosmetic department was always able to achieve that. You'd come in and they'd work their magic on you, so to speak, and you would just look fabulous. You'd feel good, and you'd end up buying a lot of stuff you didn't need.
So funny. And so I went to Macy's at Herald Square on Christmas Eve because I wanted to feel like the energy of the season. And Macy's Herald Square does incredible work.
Yes.
And the power of that store and the hundreds of people that work in that building and the 24-hour businesses and the volume that happens, that is an enormous accomplishment to do that really well.
Absolutely.
But I will tell you, energy on the beauty floor, beauty and fragrance, was on fire.
Wow.
They could not have been more engaged. They were doing everything that you would expect a beauty and fragrance floor to be doing, and passing out cards and trying to engage you. And the music was up and the energy was really high. And it made me so happy to say, this feels like the holidays.
Yeah.
And it felt really great. And that's, we didn't have much of the tourism in New York City that we normally have for the holidays, but it didn't stop this team from doing what they do really well every day. And I was just so happy to see that.
Yeah, that's really outstanding. And I think that you're right. There's a certain feeling that you can only get in person. And as much as I enjoy all the benefits of shopping online, even when there isn't a pandemic, you still need that physical contact with product, with people, that energy, like you say. It's an experience.
It is very much so. And that's where it began, and that's where it will continue to grow and get this back. And that's the whole intent of my book, was to say, let's celebrate everyone that's doing this for today, for the last 40 years, for the next 20. Let's celebrate them, because that's where the best part of your brand comes to life. And let's recognize that while the news might be bad, it doesn't mean that they don't love what they do.
Right. And I think it also doesn't mean that the consumer has turned their back on physical retail.
No, they have not. They needed to, out of their own safety this year, but it doesn't mean that when they can do it, that they won't be back.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing that from so many people who are envisioning that retail is going to come surging back, that it's going to need a new vision, need to be spruced up. need to be cleaned up, freshened up, but it doesn't mean that it can't come back. It just means that we have to make an investment in making it exciting again.
And it's not the same, if you think about business today, January 2021, there are parts of the country that are booming in retail. And like Florida specifically, or other kind of states that have more liberal kind of open shopping ideas, traffic is up, business is up. So it's not one size fits all.
Right,
and
right.
That's an interesting versus kind of a New York City, or California is on a more severe lockdown right now. It's a continued evolution. And so those of us that work in the space say, okay, great, business is happening in Florida. Let's shift product, let's shift payroll, let's shift all of our resources to take advantage of this. When it comes back to New York City, let's shift our money back in different ways. So being very flexible, very nimble to what's happening in the country, and it actually does change week to week.
I think that's a very good point. I think that you can't really look at it as just sort of one sort of unimarket. We have to look at it in niche markets.
Correct. It's been a very interesting, way to look at how the industry is evolving to, or where people are moving, where they've left, where they're moving, where they're still shopping, what are they shopping for. All of us, regardless of kind of our end use product, are really trying to understand the customer's behavior and what that will look like this year and for years to come.
Very true. I love that you advise retailers to focus on their own customers rather than obsessing about the competition. That's so true for so many businesses, not just in retail. Do you feel that a greater number of businesses today feel more comfortable following a trend rather than leading a trend?
I do, because it's the least risky path. So I'll just use an example. I moved to New York City about 6.5 years ago to help launch the retail concept for bonobos, known as the Guide Shop. And this was very much a controversial way to operate brick and mortar with no inventory, and to say that the entire purpose of the store is service, and that we are here to teach men what size chinos they should wear, how to wear their suit in the best possible way, how to style their wardrobe, how to update it without huge dollar investments. But it was entirely based on service, and all the inventory was held in the warehouse, as you may know, and shipped directly to your home. And so this was, I think, a very controversial way, but exciting way to say we can actually create great brick and mortar with low investment upfront, low cost store build outs, relatively low payroll, holding no inventory, but in a really engaging way. And what we found is those customers were incredibly loyal to the brand. They spent more money. We could capture their, all of the CRM data that everyone wants, but then stay engaged. Because once you've had this experience with a guide, as they call them, then that guide can stay in touch with that customer and say, oh, great, Ron, we just got in new colors of that chino or that shirt in the fit that you like. We just got in more. Definitely check out the website or come in and see me and I'll show you what they look like. So, and it was all sample based. So they today sit at 60 or so guide shops in a very unique business model that is still, I think, leading the industry. And that's just a new way to think about business. But that idea of kind of traditional holding too much inventory with very little payroll and kind of a low level of service is where many brands fell into that trap. And that's where we have to dig ourselves out and sometimes take risks, sometimes do business in a non-traditional way, sometimes staff it in a unique way, hire people that are different. All of it should create memorable experiences for the customer that they didn't expect to have when they walked in. And if you build a store that is just 4 walls full of product, throw some salespeople in a cash wrap and think it's going to work, that is not the future. It's not, because they can buy that product anywhere else. So what they can't buy is the service that team is going to provide, or the conversation, the experience, the connection, the education that comes, whether that's education about the brand, education about how to wear something, what to do with it, how to use it. That all happens in brick and mortar.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And we've sort of fell into a bad habit, perhaps, of selling on price. So I think that some of the models that you've pointed to, they're selling fewer but at a better price and therefore at a better margin. And that's probably going to be the way forward.
I think it has to be, because if you're going to have a smaller fleet of stores, those stores have to be highly productive and highly influential about what's customer interacts with your brand. So every touch point through technology, through social media, through your website, through brick and mortar, through then follow-up brick and mortar live shopping, that's happening very much kind of where you are in Hong Kong. We're hearing so much about live shopping. All of this is about engagement, but in a human way.
Right. I mean, it's funny because a lot of that live streaming just reminds me of, the old days of QVC, right? And Home Shopping Network, where someone would be
Right.
getting on TV and pitching their product, and then there'd be an 800 number to call in now.
Exactly. But if you kind of do it in small bites on your own website or invitation only virtual events, there's all kinds of things that you can do to continue to engage in unique ways. But engagement is really, the name of the game today.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think that very much customers want a more personalized experience. They want to feel that you care about them. They want that advice. Like you said, being able to share that knowledge is very important.
And I love this, I say education not in a casual way, because I think you should be able to leave a brick and mortar business, whether that's in tech, in home, in fashion, in beauty, and have learned something that you didn't already know. And great sales teams are, of course, concerned about converting the business, but they're also want to engage and teach, and they want you to learn about their brand and to feel like you've left there smarter or better dressed than when you arrived.
I think that's very much what a consumer wants. And I think that if you can make a person feel proud, they'll want to buy. And I think other than that, it's just something cheap at a price that's trendy and cute for the moment, but the satisfaction isn't there.
Yeah, and then it becomes disposable. You have no personal connection to your purchase. And if that's the case, then buy it on your website.
Right.
We don't need the store. But if your goal is to build memorable connections with really proud sales teams and leadership teams, this is the time where it needs to be better than it's ever been before. We have to rebuild this business with incredible people who love what they do.
Oh, absolutely. You talk about the need for better retail leadership and how that's different from being a leader in a corporate environment. How would you define a great retail leader? What do they do differently?
Retail leaders have a very unique, traditionally my experience has been, have a unique ability to connect with all kinds of different people. So they connect really well, of course, with their teams I talk in the book kind of an empathetic, curious, and focus in those ways, that level of commitment. I think they have a really true understanding of product and service and culture and store ops. So those of us that have grown up from sales into store leadership to multi-store leadership to leading teams, we understand the energy, the drive, the excitement that comes from it, that ability to connect, that ability to solve problems, all of it. I think it's more emotional than a lot of other kind of corporate leadership roles comes into. You're making decisions on the fly. You've got the largest team in an organization. The fleet of field employees is always bigger than the team at corporate. So you're leading the largest team, but it's often a lot of part-time employees. So you have to make quick decisions. They may not be as invested in their career, but then how do you encourage that connection? So in retail leadership, you are often leading someone where it's their first or second job in their life. And I take such great kind of pride and pleasure in the fact that they're 18, they just graduated high school, they've started college, they're working in retail, they're probably still living at home, and you create this environment of a great workplace, and then they go home and their parents ask them, like, how was work? Because their parents want their kids to have great first job experiences. And what do they say? Like, what is their answer when they are asked that question by their parents? Were you a great place to work? Did you train and engage and give them those necessary tools to build their career forward? Even if that career is not in retail, that's fine. But I think that there's such great joy in creating first job experiences, which is a huge part of what retail has always been founded on. I think 1 in 4 people have their first job in retail.
Wow.
Yeah. It's millions of people in the country had their first job in retail. And what was that experience? So it could change the trajectory of your career by that first job. And I take great responsibility in doing that.
That's really impressive. And kudos to you for seeing that and really trying to bring people in from the very beginning and get them involved. I think that it's really admirable, and I think very few people are willing to reach out and do that.
Yeah. And I think to your question earlier, that's why retail leaders have very special skills, because they see that and they want to engage in ways that are memorable for their team, memorable for their customer and for their brand, and do great business. And they understand the power of every touch point of our business. And that's why I'm so proud to work in this industry, but I'm more proud of the millions of people that do it every day and don't always get the recognition that they deserve.
That's true. And I think you also made a very good point in that retail is one of those few industries that is an easy one to break into. So you can get started, as you said, even with no advanced degree. And there is a clear opportunity to work your way up, whereas there aren't many other industries that enable you to get a foot in the door, even on a part-time basis.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I think is also often under-celebrated. It requires no other unique skill. You learn the skills by the brands that you work for and the leaders that you surround yourself with. And there are many great stories of real great leaders in our business who have helped mentor people for decades. There are people quoted in my book who I've been friends with for 30 plus years who still work in this business. And where we were, kids in sales or assistant managers together 30 years ago. And so we've stayed connected and built our businesses, throughout our careers. But that investment in people and those connections that we make is very unique to our business.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I have noticed that more than in other industries, the connection and the long-term relationships that people have built specifically through retail. And
so true.
Yeah, and I think that you make another good point. And I mean, I certainly value formal education, but I think that learning on the job has been sadly underrated, and it's sort of been looked down upon at a day and age when we have not only a lot of institutions, but also we have a lot of other more formalized training, which is important and certainly very valuable. But I think there's a lot to be said for learning on the job.
There is, and I think that's when you think about the word pride, which is kind of intentionally used in the title of the book. The opposite of that is feeling shame, and say, there could be shame in the fact that they weren't educated or undereducated or are not using their degree. I think they're often hearing from parents, when are you going to use your degree? When are you going to do the work that you studied? When are you going to get a real job? So that inherently says, well, then this job's not good enough. And there's shame in that. Right. And I would say, you actually run a multi-million-dollar business. You lead a team of 5, 50, 100. You have skills that you could only have learned in this business, and by doing the work and by working for a great brand. And you should be really proud of that. And when I've said that to people on a job interview that have come throughout my career, it's like they almost want to cry, because
Really?
no No one's ever said that to them before.
Wow.
It's like they kind of do this by accident and they keep working and they keep working and but no one's ever said you have and you've learned and gained incredible skills along the way, and you should be really proud of that.
Wow, that's really impressive.
It keeps me energized every day, every single day. That the idea of how do we make this a more proud part of our industry. It takes everything, manufacturing, store design, product. It takes a lot of different kind of arms of our business to make happen. But the one that is often the least celebrated is the store.
Right. Very much so. And specifically the sellers, I think, are very much overlooked.
Agreed.
So one last question. In your book, you've laid out a very clear roadmap to retail success. From your experience, what's holding retailers back from taking this road?
Today, it's cost, it's money. I think that it's sometimes the lack of understanding or appreciation of the business and the people that work in it. And I would just say, as we reset 2021 and you think about a growing e-commerce business, maybe a slightly declining or flat store business, maybe a shrinking fleet, take that fleet and reinvest back in it and make it the best possible expression of your brand. And I think what's held them back is saying, well, stores are declining. Let's invest all of our resources into e-commerce. And that does be invested in, no question, but so do stores. And their profitability may be lower than it was. You may need to spend less payroll. Fine. Then let's find the best possible people that can work in the store. Let's pay them well and let's create an environment of success. And so I think that my experience has been that's where it has fallen down is cost. And it can be the first and often the most expensive part of your business is the store business. But cutting all the costs and stripping out everything and thinking that it's going to reinvent itself is actually not the right approach, in my opinion. And take the smart investment and put a little bit more money into it, and you would be really surprised what could happen.
Well, I think that's interesting, and I'm just wondering if there wouldn't be an opportunity for senior management to engage more closely with the people who are running the actual physical retail and work more collaboratively.
I think there is. I think any business today with a brick and mortar fleet should have all of its team members spend some time in stores, whether that's through the onboarding process, through a week, a quarter in stores. There has to be a continued connection. If you're a buyer, you have to understand the customer, and the customer is in your stores every day. Go ask them. Hey, I'm the buyer for sweaters. Tell me what kinds of sweaters you're looking for right now. And while that's one customer at a time, and it's not always the best, 5 people doesn't create a trend, but the idea of just getting into the heads of the people who are interacting with the customer every day, you can learn so much from that and can keep learning and growing, and every part of a business can learn more by spending more time in stores.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that, as we've been talking about throughout the conversation, that disconnect between management, buyers, and the selling floor has been really to the detriment of retail.
It's unfortunate, but I think we have the opportunity to do this better this year. We have to. We actually don't have a choice now.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. There is no more, our back is to the river, so to speak. So we have only one opportunity, and that's either we move forward or we drown.
It's so true. And I want to move forward. I want to help the industry and the people move forward.
Well, I think that any retailer who has you on their team is going to win no matter what. I mean, honestly, you bring so much energy, so many ideas. I'm just excited listening to you, and your book was very, very inspirational. I think that anybody it would be time and money well spent to read that book, and we will definitely put a link in the show notes here so that people will have an opportunity to access your book and avail themselves of the tremendous information and ideas that you share. You can also find Ron's book on Amazon. It's called Retail Pride.
Thank you. That's very generous. I really appreciate that, Jane.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Ron. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and good luck in 2021.
You too. Thanks so much. If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join us again next week when I'll be sitting down with Dirk Robins of Abana and talking about a new platform for sourcing apparel in Africa. And if you're overwhelmed by information and wish someone could just sift and sort through it all and provide you with a tight summary of just what you need to know, then you might want to check out Inside Fashion's Market Snapshots. You can find more information at insidefashionlive.net/snapshots. You can also find the link in the show notes for this episode. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.